tonight. We're very grateful for our partnership we get to have with the library, and thanks to those who are joining us online as well. For those of you in person, we will have a Q&A period after the presentation, and for anyone online, feel free to leave any questions or comments in the Facebook comments box, and we will get to those that we can. Just a few announcements before we get started. We try to do at least one of these programs every month, so if you will follow us on our Facebook page, you can sign up for the next program. You can also find information about our upcoming programs in our newsletter. You should all have one in your seat. You can also find the newsletter online. Tom will put that on Facebook. Our speaker series tonight with Jack Hanrahan is a great primer for the Charlottesville Civil Rights Tour to be held this summer. It is a partnership between the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center and the Memory Project at UVA Karsh Institute of Democracy. The tour will be held from June 26th to July 2nd, so please consider joining them for their Summer Insider Expedition. You can find information online by searching for Charlottesville Civil Rights Tour, and we will drop a link in the Facebook for that as well. And as you will see on the front of our newsletter, our new website for our Race and Sports Oral History Project is now live. It's called No Playbook. It captures powerful and impactful story of desegregation in Charlottesville and Albemarle County from the viewpoint of those who experienced it firsthand, the students. You can find the new site at noplaybook.albemarlehistory.org. All right, for some upcoming programs, we have guided tours by appointment. You can check out our list of tours on our website. And if you're interested in taking a walking tour of the Court Square area, downtown Mall, Maplewood Cemetery, any of that, you'll want to contact me at programs@albemarlehistory.org. April 15th and 16th, that is this weekend, Saturday and Sunday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. It will be our first days of operating the Hatton Ferry for the season. So if you've never ridden on the Hatton Ferry, the last poled ferry in the United States, or it's been a while, come down and visit me, okay? May 6th, Saturday, 2:30 p.m., we will have a community day at the Hatton Ferry. So join us to celebrate that, and a very generous donation we've received from John and Trula Wright. April 29th, you should also find this announcement on your seat or one of the adjacent seats. We are holding a very special tour inside the walls of worship. If you want to understand the soul of the community, look inside the walls of its houses of worship. You can sign up online. Tom will put a link on Facebook. The tickets are $40 a person, and again, you can find additional information at achswallsofworship.eventbrite.com. On May 20th, that's a Saturday at 12 p.m. noon at the Center of Belvedere, we will have Dr. Catherine Coker, who will be discussing her book, Virginia Prisoners of War Camps in World War II. That will be a very interesting presentation. June 7th, that's a Wednesday, 6 p.m., also at the Center of Belvedere, we will have Heather S. Cole, who will will give us a presentation called At Home with the Virginia Presidents. She will talk about visiting all 8 of the Virginia presidential homes and our experiences there. Also, hold the date for June 23rd, 7:30 p.m., and June 24th, 3 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. at the PVCC Theater for a play called Can't Feel at Home. It's an original play by Dr. John T. Glick. It tells the stories of the families who were displaced from the Blue Ridge Mountains to make way for the Shenandoah National Park and the Skyline Drive. In December and January, it's sold out in Harrisonburg, so it's coming to Albemarle County, and they want to present the play in every county that was affected by the displacements. So I encourage you to check that out. Okay, that's enough with my announcements. But before we get going with the presentation, I'd like to invite the president of the Historical Society, Phyllis Loeffler, who has a few words for you. Announcements. But before we get
I think my voice is coming through the machine, but in any case. First of all, as Sterling said, I'm Phyllis Loeffler. I'm the current president of the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society. I want to welcome all of you tonight. This is an amazing turnout, an amazing crowd, and I know it's going to be a wonderful program. And you've just heard from Sterling about all that we are doing at the Historical Society. Some of you who've been in Charlottesville for a long time know that this is a new face on the Historical Society. We're much more active than we've been in the past. We have so many exciting things and different kinds of things going on. And I'm going to keep this short and quick, but I just want to remind everyone in this room that nothing is really free in life, and programs like this, which we bring to you without charge, are also not free. We have a really lean staff at the Historical Society. We are doing a tremendous amount with volunteers and a very small paid staff. So I really want to encourage you, if you haven't done so, please become a member of the Historical Society. It's not expensive. And also let you know that membership is not enough. So we have a little box right in the back, and attached to this newsletter is an envelope. And if you've enjoyed tonight's program, please consider making a donation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John. Okay, now for the show. Again, I'm Sterling Howell, Programs Manager with the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society. Thank you very much for joining me. Tonight is another installment of our speaker series, and our very special speaker tonight is John Hanrahan, better known as Jack. As Jack told me in 2018, he and his wife Lisa took a lengthy car trip to the South. They visited places where the civil rights history was made decades ago, and the trip changed them. Jack spent the next 3 years researching and writing about the civil rights movement that Pulitzer Prize winning historian Taylor Branch labeled, quote, the essence of patriotism. Jack's book, Traveling Freedom's Road, A Guide to Exploring Our Civil Rights History, came out in May of 2022, and pretty sure he's going to have some on sale in the back after the program. Jack's going to share some stories with us about many courageous men and women who made the civil rights movement, with a focus on several whose contributions are not as widely known. So thank you very much again for joining us tonight. Jack, history's all yours.
Thank you, Sterling. I think that'll be the only time an introduction from me includes the words Pulitzer Prize winning. Thanks to Taylor Branch. First, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate the wonderful turnout, and I also am extraordinarily grateful for the chance that the Historical Society and the library has given to me. I want to take you on a little bit of a journey, much like the one that my wife and I took in 2018. You're going to see both of these slides again, so if the names of the cities are a little small, you'll see them in full screen. I'm going to whip you around the loop, that I call it, of major civil rights sites that make up the core of the book, and that's going to be the front half of the presentation. And then we're going to focus on our own Commonwealth of Virginia. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. And my hope is that these two things will encourage you to get on the road and explore some of this extremely important history. My book, as you saw, was entitled Traveling Freedom's Road. It's a guide to exploring our civil rights history. The core of the book are those must-see cities that you see on this oddly shaped loop. If we're from Virginia, the obvious place for us to start might be either Anniston or Atlanta on the eastern side of the tour, but someone who lives in Texas or Missouri could start their tour in Little Rock or in Jackson from say, Houston area. The trip itself requires about 2 weeks, which I realize is tough, it's expensive, it's taxing, it's emotional, but that's what a loop like that. But you can do a shorter loop, and I believe the tour that the Jefferson School that Sterling mentioned will be mostly on the eastern part of this particular loop. I'm going to start with an apology. I get really wound up in these topics. I know I want to leave a lot of room for Q&A, so I'm going to try my best to control my enthusiasm so you'll have plenty of time to ask me questions at the end, or to tell me to back up and clarify anything that I said along the way. So let's get started in Atlanta. The book recommends that you spend a day in Atlanta, split between two important areas. One is the Sweet Auburn area, Auburn Avenue, the heart of the Black community, where Dr. King was born. You have a chance to tour his birth house. You have a chance to sit in the Ebenezer Baptist Church. I recommend in the book that when you do that, take the Drum Major Instinct speech. He delivered that 2 months before his funeral. It's a 35-minute long speech. Definitely listen to the last 5 minutes. Dr. King was talking to us about we all can be great and we all should be humble. And it's a wonderful speech, and it's an appropriate thing to listen to while you sit in that sacred place of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, the original one. There's a new one across Auburn Avenue, outside of which is this wonderful Behold statue. The Behold statue recognizing an African ritual of holding a baby up to the sky and telling that young child, behold, the only thing greater than you are. After spending about a half a day, maybe a little bit more on Auburn Avenue, you need to go about 3 miles over to the Atlanta University complex, where universities like Morehead, Spelman, Clark Atlanta, where there's a lot of historic churches, places where activism and planning meetings occurred during the 1960s. So I've designed it as a walking tour, but if your legs are worn out from being over on Auburn Avenue, I give you a driving route in the book. From Atlanta, we head a bit west, a couple of hours over to Montgomery and Tuskegee. Tuskegee could be a stop along the way where you can go to the Institute. You can go to the Tuskegee Airmen Museum, or a small museum that recognizes what happened in Tuskegee with the syphilis study. Montgomery has a ton of different things to do. Obviously, it's the city where the bus boycott that spanned more than a year from 1955 into 1956 successfully broke segregation on the Montgomery city buses. Rosa Parks, of course, is a major part of that story. There's a museum with her name at the bus stop where she refused to give up her seat. That's one of those must-sees. The other two must-sees are, there's more than two. The two other must-sees, I should say, are the facilities that are run by the Equal Justice Initiative, run by Brian Stevenson. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice is a place where the victims of lynching are honored, and we're going to talk more about an incident that occurred closer to home when I get into the Virginia section. The Legacy Museum is a more broader, topical place, and again, something that you should plan to spend at least 4 or 5, I'd say, well, on my going through museums, I'd say 4 hours, but I'm a read every board and content piece that you can see kind of person. Dr. King's Church, the Dexter Avenue Baptist King Memorial Baptist Church, as it's now named, and his parsonage are also things that are important to see. But there's so much. I mean, the book talks a lot about the unsung heroes of the civil rights movement. Joanne Gibson Robinson was a faculty member at Alabama State University, and I take some time in the book to talk about her. She has her own sidebar. She mimeographed, and looking at this audience, there might be a couple of you that remember what a mimeograph machine is. So explain it to those who don't. She mimeographed about 5,000 flyers after the arrest of Rosa Parks, passed them out around the city so people would know that the bus boycott was going to occur on that Monday, a rainy Monday. So it was passed around all the churches in, all the black churches anyway, in Montgomery. And that first day was a big success. And I could talk about much more in Montgomery, but I better move on. I imagine that every person taking a civil rights tour has Selma on their bucket list. They must see it. And crossing that Edmund Pettus Bridge, a historic bridge, unfortunately named after a Confederate general, but that's the way it goes, is something that you'll want to do. Those headphones that you had in Atlanta, listening to the drum major speech, definitely put them going over this bridge. In fact, listen to something that you find moving on a bench on the city side of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and listen to it as you carefully cross the span, because it's extremely noisy. You can't believe what noise a Ford F-150 can make when they don't fix the mufflers. On the way, though, from Montgomery to Selma, there's a couple of stops that I suggest. One is a memorial to a woman who came to the Selma to Montgomery March from Detroit, Viola Liuzzo, a white woman. She was killed by Klansmen as she transported people back from the Montgomery March back to the Selma area. There's an incredibly long and interesting story that you can read more about in the book of how an FBI informant played a role in her murder. Also on that Route 80, historic Route 80, where the march occurred, there are camps where the marchers went by and slept on their way to Montgomery, excuse me. And I would definitely recommend stopping at one in Lowndes County, where there's a National Park Service site that is infinitely better than the one in Selma. The Lowndes County National Park site in Lowndes County is just much better than the one in the city of Selma. There's also one in Montgomery, which wasn't opened by the time we went in 2018, but has subsequently opened, and it's mentioned in the book. I start each chapter of the book by giving you some context about the city that you're going to. Everybody seems to know the story about Selma, but not too many people know the story about Jimmy Lee Jackson in Marion, Alabama, just northwest of Selma. This memorial marker tells the story of how, in trying to protect his grandfather and his mom, he was shot by a police officer in a diner. And 8 days later, he was dead. And the motivation factor for the Selma to Montgomery March was that death. It caused people to think, what should we do to honor Jimmy Lee Jackson? And ultimately, it was decided to do a Selma to Montgomery March. Everybody knows about Bloody Sunday, and most people know about the start of the successful march, but there was a second march that started, and it happened on Tuesday, and it became known as Turnaround Tuesday. So the story of Turnaround Tuesday and Jimmy Lee Jackson begins the Selma chapter, and that's endemic of the way I try to write, to share things that I certainly didn't know at all or much about prior to taking this trip. You've been in a small town of Selma, you go on to another small southern town, Philadelphia, Mississippi, where in 1964, it was Freedom Summer, and the church that used to be there at the Mount Zion United Methodist Church, excuse me to all the Methodists in the room, a nice contingent, I might add. Um, Anyway, I'll try not to joke. The Mount Zion Church was going to be used as one of the freedom schools during Freedom Summer to try to make up for some of the education gap that black children were getting. Well, they burned the church down, and 3 civil rights workers, Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, went there to that church to see if it could still be used for the school. And as they were trying to get back to Meridian, where they were based, the police essentially kidnapped them, put them in jail, and at 10 o'clock at night, they were let out to drive back to Meridian. And civil rights workers knew that you don't drive after sunset, and they were then stopped, murdered, and car burnt and buried in a berm. Philadelphia is a place where not enough stuff is memorialized, and the book takes you to where their burned out Ford station wagon was found in the Bogchito Swamp. It takes you to the edge of the private property, recommends you don't go on that private property, where they were sadly discovered several months after the murders occurred. It also takes you to another neighborhood. We were in Atlanta's Auburn Avenue. We go to Philadelphia's Carver Avenue. This is one of those experiences you don't read about in any book. Carver Avenue is where the organizing was, and that cafe, McClellan's Cafe, is owned by Randy Gill and his wife Beverly. Beverly is the daughter of Amos McClellan, and I think Lissa and I planned on spending, maybe 20 minutes in there to have a cup of coffee and a conversation. We must have spent over an hour. Of course, Randy did most of the talking. So if you go in, you get your coffee, and then you listen to Randy, and he's an interesting man. Beverly is quiet, but it's definitely a place that you don't find mentioned in too many books. There's no museums in Philadelphia. You're basically traveling from one unrecognized place to some recognized place, sometimes with inaccurate information on the marker. Then you go to the state capital of Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi, and this slide gives you 2 contrasting places that you really need to see. On my right, way over here, your left. If I don't have a baseball glove on, I mix up left and right. The Evers home, Medgar and Merle Evers. Medgar Evers, an organizer, the NAACP, murdered on June 11th, 1963, in his own carport. You still see the bloodstained parts of the carport, the bullets in the house. You see how they set up the kids' rooms so any bullets would not have a chance to hurt the children. Their beds were always low to the ground. The National Park Service took the Evers home over, and by perhaps 2024, it'll be ready for visitors once again. We were fortunate to get in there before the NPS took it over, and were toured by a woman who at one point in her life was a college student and had met Medgar Evers. The Mississippi Civil Rights Museum is right next to the Museum of Mississippi History. We closed that place down. We were the last ones to leave. It's a phenomenal place. I mean, Mississippi has, at least in that museum, has recognized its past, is honest about it, it's creatively presented, and I highly recommend going there. I didn't recommend you go to the state capitol in Atlanta, nor did I recommend that you go to the state capitol in Montgomery, but I definitely recommend you go to the state capitol in Mississippi. It's not just because it's a beautiful building, which it is, much better than the state capitol in Montgomery, but go to the top floor. And you know how legislators have their pictures on the wall? Go look at the legislative folks that were there in the 50s and 60s, and you can understand the what the black population was up against. This was a state that at the time had 33%, more than 33% of the population was black, but there's not a single black face in the legislature during those years. Mississippi also had a sovereignty commission, as it was known, that essentially spied on activists and did everything possible to make their life miserable. That same top floor was the headquarters of the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. You then go north with the destination of the Emmett Till sites perhaps in mind. You're in the Mississippi Delta. You might stop in Greenwood, see where Stokely Carmichael, gave his Black Power speech, but you want to get to the Emmett Till sites. The first stop is Money. If ever there was a town that was misnamed, it is Money, Mississippi. There's like 3 buildings there, one of which is the Bryant's Meat and Grocery Store. This is where Emmett Till allegedly said something, did something toward Carolyn Bryant and caused him to be kidnapped once her husband returned to town. That building is not well cared for, as you can see. It's basically going to fall down. The same people who own that own the gas station, service station, right next to it. They received $200,000+ of Mississippi grant money to restore the Ben Roy service station. A little fact that I learned when I was reading about this, owned by the Tribble family, Ray Tribble was a juror in the Emmett Till murder trial. Then you move on to the sites that relate to the finding of his body in the Tallahatchie River. A lot of misinformation on both of these signs. This sign was obviously down, ripped off when we went to visit. Alyssa and I drove right past it, drove maybe 2 more miles on that dusty farm road, came back and said, this is where it should be. I got out and I looked in the weeds and these posts were there. You can see the bullet holes perhaps on the riverside. A company in Brooklyn, this sign has always had challenges. You may have seen videos of college kids with, AR-15s and the like, posing near this with Confederate flags and so on. They have built a sign, a company in Brooklyn, New York has built a sign that essentially is its own security system. It'll light up when anybody's nearby, good or bad, that's good. It also will be bullet resistant. And as far as I know, that promise has been kept. There's a lot more to see in the Delta. I'm not talking about you'd have to go a bit out of your way to go to where Emmett was actually killed. Emmett Till was killed in a seed barn in Drew, Mississippi, about 30 miles away from where he was kidnapped. So those kidnappers had a lot of time to think about what they were about to do. There's a lot of other sites that relate to the Emmett Till story, and they're told in the book. At this juncture, when you're in the Delta, you either can go further west to Little Rock, and that's going to be a 3-hour drive, or you can go north about 2 hours to Memphis. And we struggled with this when we were planning our trip, and we said, we've got to, be judicious with this 2,500-mile journey that we're about to take. But we went to Little Rock, and boy, are we glad that we did. At the time, I was like 9 years old when that crisis occurred, and because there's a connection to Rhode Island in the whole story, that being that Governor Faubus, who shut down or kept the Little Rock Nine from getting into the school, met with President Eisenhower in Newport when President Eisenhower, of course, was golfing there. But you learn so much more about what went on during the school year for those 9 young men and women, and we'll talk maybe in the Q&A more about that. But you have a decision to make. Memphis is, of course, a must-see because of this particular museum. I gave high praise to the Mississippi Museum. This is also a tremendous museum. There's 24 permanent galleries. The last thing you see is the room that Dr. King stayed in the night before he was killed April 4th, 1968. And then you go across the street, not terribly well seen here, but there's a museum, part of the museum called the Legacy Building, and you can go look into the bathroom that James Earl Ray, again, I'm not in the allegedly camp there, but he stayed there, that's a fact, and allegedly shot Dr. King from that bathroom window. There's a lot of interesting stuff about the possible conspiracies that are related to the King murder, and they're all well covered in that Legacy building. Yes, ma'am.
May I just add one thing about that?
Please.
One, I went with my daughters, and one of the things, well, actually, it's two things. They have the lunch counter in Greensboro, with people yelling and so forth, so you, as a visitor, experience how it was for those young people to come and sit down at the lunch counter. Then they have the school buses, where, you know, like Rosa Parks, the yelling, the driver shouting, I mean, really ugly. And then the third thing that I thought was really impressive was there's a room that has telephones where you get firsthand accounts from people who wanted to vote, you know, throughout, 40, 50 years, and their personal experiences of what they had to go through in order to be able to vote.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. And of course, it makes me think of one more thing that I'd like to add. So early on in the visit, in one of the first galleries, there is a room in the round that deals with slavery. And one of the little alcoves, they have sculptured human figures crouched down in the kind of space that was made available to the enslaved as they came from Africa. In the room, as you walk, every step you hear creak, creak of the ship and the sounds that would be likely be made. It's a full sensory experience, and just there's so many things that you, quote, will never forget. The Memphis chapter, thank you again for sharing that. The Memphis chapter starts with the backstory to why Dr. King was there. I think most people know about the sanitation strike because it went on for many days, but the two names that we all must say are Echo Smith and Robert Walker. Those were the two sanitation workers, not the first, but the two that were most recently killed with malfunctioning garbage trucks, essentially. It was raining, they couldn't go into shelter anywhere but inside their own truck. There was a malfunction and they were crushed. So anyway, there's so many things I could be talking about that there's just not enough time, and I have to watch the time. I forgot to set my clock, but I see it's 7:05, so I better speed it up. Birmingham has two of the seminal events that happened 60 years ago. In the spring, you had the Children's Crusade, where barking dogs and high-powered hoses were set upon children and teenagers by the Birmingham Police and Fire Department. In the fall of that year, you had the bombing at the 16th Street Baptist Church, and the four young girls really, that were killed in that bombing. It's all very tightly, geographically tight for visitors to see. Besides these things being across the street from one another, this is Kelly Ingram Park where the march occurred. There's the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, which does focus on civil rights more broadly and African American history more broadly, and it does a very good job, and I don't mean to slight it. There, again, so much more I could talk about, but I'm going to have to pick it up. Our tour concluded in Anniston, Alabama, where on Mother's Day in 1961, the Klan members attacked the first Freedom Riders bus that pulled into the city. You can see it got away from the city, but with flat tires couldn't go any further, and firebombs, Molotov cocktails were thrown inside. You can see there's a park being developed near where that occurred, but you can also see that the penchant to burn things has not gone away in Anniston. If you were from Virginia, you could head home. You've got a 9-hour drive. You might even be in your own bed that night. But there's a couple of places in Virginia that I'm going to tell you about that you might want to stop on the way home. Just to tell you that the book doesn't just focus on those key cities in these 5 core states. Each of those 5 core states gets a chapter that talks about other historic places and events. So in Alabama, there's a section on the Scottsboro Boys. There's a commentary on how you can go to different facilities that will tell you a lot more about that story. Then we broaden out to the states that border any one of those 5 states, and each of those get a chapter, and I'll be talking about some of the things that are in the Virginia chapter. And then, because this is a self-published book, I had the luxury of going further. I'm sure that if a publisher ever was smart enough to have taken this book, they would have said, this last chapter of 100 or so, not 100, maybe 80 pages, that deals with 24 other states. I wanted to at least cover 3, sometimes I'd sneak in 5 places that people could go. So in Illinois, I've got some places in Chicago, but I also have a museum that's downstate in Springfield, and similarly with Pennsylvania. So the book is pretty comprehensive geographically. So now I'm trying to get you back to Virginia. And I repeat the slide that you saw, hopefully with the cities being a little bit easier to see. And I'm afraid, cluttered up the slide with 5 pictures, but I wanted to at least comment on these before I get into more detail on a few other things closer to home. Obviously, Virginia is where the first Africans landed on the slave ship, the White Lion, memorialized out there on the Chesapeake. A major slave rebellion led by Nat Turner lasted for several days in this area of the state, and there are historical markers that you can go to and see that. Also, in terms of history of Virginia's connection to enslaving people, the Franklin and Armfield Agency, one of the major slave traders in the United States at the time. Franklin, based in Alexandria, Virginia, would buy enslaved men, women, and children from tobacco farmers whose land had been depleted by overuse for tobacco, and he would ship those people down to New Orleans, where Armfield would sell them at a huge profit. That now is a city museum owned by the city of Alexandria called the Freedom House Museum. Highly recommend that. A little closer to our own time in the 20th century, the Loving case, interracial marriage, that there's a couple of markers, one in Richmond, one in Milford, that have a relation to that. Good teaching opportunities if you're out with children or grandchildren. Lemuel Penn is one of those names that I tried to put into the book that most people haven't heard about. He's one of the blacks in Arlington National Cemetery. He was murdered by Klansmen in Georgia as he was returning to his job as an assistant school superintendent in Washington, D.C. I know you can't read this, but he was killed on July 11th, 1964. That date is important because just 7 days earlier, I need to do my math, 9 days earlier. 9 days earlier, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 went into effect. And while a Georgia court, all-white jury, of course, found the murderers innocent or not guilty of the crime, they were prosecuted under the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and at least spent some time in prison. In Charlottesville, we have a number of ways to connect with this important history. The memorial to the enslaved laborers, I hope you have a chance to go over there, spend some time. You can see how purposeful the design was when you see the names that they put in, or they didn't have a name, they would put a blank. They would put a, not an occupation, the role that the person played. They might be a baker, or it might be a bricklayer or something, when they had that bit of information. But saying their names was important to the descendants now living who had a lot of input. It's as big as the rotunda. That was important. And it doesn't look it when you're standing there because it's on the ground, but it's a very big space, and that's the intentionality of it. And it's an open space, and it's inspired by a ritual dance called the ring shout, an African ritual dance that came to the United States with the enslaved. Some of the ugly history associated with our area, the lynching. I mentioned the Equal Justice Initiative. They have a community remembrance project that thankfully Albemarle County has bought into. John Henry James was lynched. If you've ever gone to Farmington Country Club, you cross over some railroad tracks. When you turn right or left into that road, in 1898, it was called Woods Crossing. There was a stop there. John Henry Jones accused of accosting a white woman. He professed his innocence. For his own safety, he was taken to Stanton on July 11th. He was brought back by train on July 12th. A mob of 150 unmasked, and not a pandemic unmasked. I'm not ashamed of what I'm about to do, hung John Henry James, even though he professed his innocence. 2 law enforcement officers stood by and let that happen. If you follow the news around here, there's always something about the slave block marker at number nothing, as it's called, number nothing Court Square, and that is the building. And this is at least one thing that was in the ground at a time when I was able to take a picture. It's been stolen, it's thrown in the river. There's a lot of things going on with that. Those jars of soil, there's one for John Henry James in the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, and then there's one that, at least according to the website, makes the tour of our libraries annually. So be looking for that as you visit our libraries. Some major cases in civil rights history had an impact on some local people. Gregory Swanson wanted to go to UVA Law School. The whole separate but equal was such a silly concept when it came to law school. You wouldn't need a separate law school, but the NAACP smartly challenged separate but equal first with the law schools, and that particular case was actually heard inside what's now the Central Library. And as you go into the Central Library, you can see this sign and maybe read more and think about Mr. Swanson, who did eventually get a law degree. I think it's 2 years at UVA and 1 year at Howard, and then he went to work for the IRS. Go figure. Speaking of folks that we see on television, Charles Alexander, Alex Zan, he does so many wonderful things for our community. He was one of the Charlottesville 12. Where to begin this? So Brown v. Board occurs. Parents in Charlottesville want their kids to go to a better school. They ask the school board. They delay, appeal. There's a judge that says, you got to do it. Governor Allman shuts down schools around Virginia in what's become known as massive resistance. And eventually, Judge Paul makes the ruling that those kids are going to go to school immediately. The schools, Allman opened the schools in February of '59, and by the fall, the judge says those kids are going, and 9 youngsters went to elementary and 3 went to Lane High, which is now the county building, which is why that picture. I kind of blocked out Venable School, which is the other one here, to get a close-up of the sign. Great story. I got to tell it. How much time do I have? This is a gentleman I never heard of before, Henry Brown, better known as Henry Box Brown. He grew up on a plantation in Louisa County. At age 15, his enslaver sends him to Richmond to work. He gets a job in tobacco factories and so on. His wife, and they have 3 children, his wife is owned by another person, and that person decides he's going to sell the wife and the 3 kids, which he does. And the wife is pregnant, by the way, at the time. Box Brown is understandably upset, and he says, I am going to find a way out. And this box is probably too big. He goes in a 3 by 3 by 3 box with the help of a white shoemaker and a black friend, a free man, and he ships himself to a Quaker in Philadelphia and successfully gets there. And he gets there like in less than 2 days. I mean, you mail something from Charlottesville today, you know. And so this depicts, and this is Frederick Douglass in this little thing. Frederick Douglass was upset at Box Brown for writing a memoir because he didn't want a lot of people to know that you could use this method. But they both toured on the abolition circuit, both employed by the Massachusetts anti-slavery. Both left the United States when the Fugitive Slave Law was passed in 1850. Box Brown stayed there for 25 years. Frederick Douglass came back when one of his daughters died in the late 1850s. Anyway, I digress, sort of. Another really important story, maybe the most important story that relates to Virginia, in my own opinion, is the story of Barbara Johns. Barbara Johns in the middle of the Capitol Grounds Civil Rights Memorial. Barbara Johns is 16 years old in 1951. 1951. Where's Martin Luther King in 1951? In the early spring, he's preparing his valedictorian speech at the seminary that he's about to graduate from. And in the fall, he's getting ready to enter Boston University for graduate studies. So this is way before Martin Luther King. And Barbara Johns leads a walkout of students at the Black High School, Moton High School, 75 miles from here. A wonderful trip to take and a wonderful museum to see. She convinces she tricks the principal to leave the school. Everybody knows this story. And leads a student walkout, which ultimately leads to a lot of things, but the inclusion of the case in Prince Edward County to be woven in to the Brown v. Board of Education case, where there's 5 geographically separate places. Brown v. Board is in Topeka, Kansas, and the other ones are all over the east. Anyway, Barbara Johns, I think, is a hero, and her statue, hopefully in a year or so, will be in the Statuary Hall in the Congress, replacing a gentleman by the last name of Lee. I can't sort of remember him. I apologize if this has gone too long. I mean, I know it. I mean, that's why I apologized up front. I just get one. Oh, I'm not even finished with the Virginia. This is also 2 great stories. In the Hampton area, you can go to the university, which has the first African-American museum created in the United States. A lot of history at Hampton, but the history associated with that oak tree that's the Emancipation Oak, and it's the first place where the Emancipation Proclamation was read in the South. This story is about this handsome gentleman, Benjamin Butler, from my mother's hometown of Lowell, Massachusetts. Virginia has just voted to secede. The legislature had said we're going to secede, but Virginia residents, males, white, voted to secede from the Union by an 80-20 margin. And the same day that it comes in, 3 enslaved men show up at Fort Monroe. They seek entrance. There's a sentry from the state of Vermont at the gate. I don't know his name. I'd love to know his name. You know, I put myself in the position of that young man coming from Vermont. Has he ever seen a black person before? You know, does he know that, you know, these are the first folks to come over from the Confederate side to say, I want asylum here. What is he going to do? Is he going to turn them away? He lets them in. What is Benjamin Butler going to do? He actually meets with a colonel from the Confederate side who wants to bring them back to their owner. And the Butler, who's a lawyer, says, well, because the Colonel Carey says to him, you know, there's the fugitive slave law in effect, passed in 1850. It's 1861. And he says, Butler says, well, you're not part of the United States. You left. And so Butler goes back and says, I better tell Washington about this. I've got, I'm writing my report. Before he can get the report on horseback to go to Washington, 7 more people come the next day seeking asylum. The following day, 46 more come. I'm thinking the cat is out of the bag, but that is not the right phrase to use here. The die is cast, you know, and Fort Monroe becomes a refugee place for what Butler calls contrabands of war. They're not prisoners of war, they're not soldiers, they are this new term, contrabands. And it's just another wonderful part of Virginia civil rights, African American history. The book is 500 plus pages. It's the most current one out. It came out, well, it'll be 1 year old on around May 1st. You saw how geographically comprehensive it was. And I think it's a book that works if you want to get on the road or you just want to read from the armchair and understand this history. And despite my trying, it became a self-published book, but trying to get it published. This is not a profit-oriented, income-oriented project for me. Equal Justice Initiative and Legal Aid here in Charlottesville get the profits. I've been a volunteer at Legal Aid for almost as long as I've been in Charlottesville, and you know, there's a lot of wonderful organizations, but that was the local organization that I thought should get the profits along with EJI. I was fortunate enough to have a number of people read the book or a chapter of the book in some cases. Dr. Shelley Murphy, who's on the board of the Historical Society and a major force behind the Descendants Project at UVA, wrote a nice little verb for me. I mentioned the killing of the 4 girls in Birmingham and Medgar Evers and other atrocities in civil rights history. Jerry Mitchell was a journalist for the Clarion Ledger in Jackson, did amazing work, and he was very kind to take the book. But the one I'm I hate to say I'm most proud of is the contact I've had with Dr. Terrence Roberts, who was one of the Little Rock Nine. His opening line, you know, there's moments of aha, I never knew that, and why haven't I heard about this? And I loved his last line, such a book is surely needed. So there's some people who know this history that have liked it. I have not even scratched the surface of all the wonderful opportunities to learn, get mad, hopefully do something about it. There are places that I didn't know how they connected, stories that I had never heard, events that I didn't know much about. I knew about Robert Kennedy talking at what's now called Kennedy King Park in Indianapolis on the evening of April 4th. That's another speech everybody should listen to the audio on. So I'll leave this up. If you have any questions, I'm really anxious to take them, share any thoughts and your own experiences. This is how to get in touch with me. I gave you my legal aid address and the book's email address. Did I say, yeah, email address. I will put the lights up now, at least a little more, so I can see all of you. Yeah, you look as good as you did a half hour ago. I guess an hour ago. So, who would like to start with a question? Yes, ma'am. Phyllis?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a little connection here between some of the wonderful things that you've told us. And first, I want to say thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
For
Thank
writing
you.
the book. Well, when we talk about our local history here in Charlottesville, one of the projects that the Historical Society has been involved in is this oral history project that we've been doing with, I think Sterling talked about it, speaking about or doing oral histories with people who were alive and in high school during the massive resistance years.
Mm-hmm.
And that is available for anyone who wants to learn some more of our local history. And many of those, or a number of those, Charlottesville 12 that you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
have been interviewed, many of them in their 70s, documenting their stories for the first time. So I just wanted to
Thank you.
sort of
Mm-hmm.
add that little connection.
Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Really incredible, really
Oh.
incredible. Thank you so much. And I'm just curious what your profession is or what.
So my profession now is trying to market this book and speaking before wonderful people like you. My career was in the advertising business. I worked at the Leo Burnett Company in Chicago, a pretty major advertising agency. It did ads for United Airlines. It created Tony the Tiger, the Maytag Repairman, the Keebler Elves, and all sorts of other critters, as they were called inside Leo Burnett. I left Burnett after working there for 22 years and went to the Coca-Cola Company. I was in charge of media globally for Coca-Cola for a bit, and I then worked for a small and ultimately successful startup company in Atlanta, and moved to New York to continue in what I would call more the mainstream of advertising. I worked for another large media agency in New York City, and went off on my own to do some consulting work. 2011, Melissa and I moved to Charlottesville, and everything was calm until we took that trip, and there was never an intention to write a book, but at the time, the most recent book, now I'm writing in 2019, most recent book was in 2008, very good book by Charles Cobb. And Mr. Cobb's book, obviously doesn't have all the newer things that have come on stream, and including museums and markers and tours of historic churches and schools, etc. I had some good feedback on the first chapter or two that I tried out and plugged away, and this was my pandemic project. I would be down in the basement so I wouldn't bother my wife as much as usual. Thank you for your question, though. Thank you. Anyway.
Was that your only guideline, that the book that you just mentioned? Like the mapping of it, was that your...
Oh, I did the maps, yeah. I mean, I'd love to have better maps in the book, but the maps in the book are my creation, thanks to Google for having a thing called Google My Maps. And the state maps were blank maps that I had to put little stars on, and I mean, if I had a nickel for every font I tried to, yeah. So it was.
So you put that whole loop together, in essence.
You mean?
Before your trip.
Oh.
What outline?
So before the trip, I mean, I am a inveterate travel planner. I love.
Clearly.
Yeah, I love to go places, and I love to know a lot about where I'm going and what I'm going to do when I get there, to make the most of it, to get the most value out of it. So I had planned, I thought, pretty well for this trip, but in doing the book, I learned lots more. I mean, like, I just pick on Atlanta. You know, I mentioned some things. Obviously, I knew about the two places that I mentioned here, but there's a Jewish synagogue in Atlanta, 4 miles from Auburn Avenue, and the rabbi there and Dr. King were very close friends. The rabbi spoke at Dr. King's services, and that synagogue was bombed. You know, so I have, for people who are interested in going to that sacred place, there's a gravesite in Southview Cemetery for Ruby Doris Smith Robinson. Ruby Doris Smith Robinson was an activist in a very male-oriented student nonviolent coordinating committee. And she really kept all those boys in line and did a wonderful job. And so you know, whenever I would encounter someone like Ruby Doris or Unita Blackwell or someone, I would try to write about them in the book, sometimes within the context of a location, or sometimes in the case of Ruby Doris Smith Robinson, a sidebar. And as I'm researching, I see this wonderful caricature. There's some words that are not in the book because in my interaction with the artist who did this, she said to me, "You might want me to take out some of the language." And I said, "If you're willing to do that, I would be grateful. But if you're not, I'm going to use your thing anyway. Use your, if you let me." So that's one of those things in Atlanta that I didn't mention. So
So
I
the
mean,
language is how she was referred to?
I think there was an adjective before badass.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And that adjective and badass came out, and it just says freedom rider, fiery administrator for the Student Nonviolent Committee, and legend of the sassy direct action. Sadly, Ruby only lived to be 25. She died of cancer in October of '67. So, and you know, because I can't tell the whole story of Ruby, I talk about the book that was written about her life. So if you want to read more about Ruby, and one thing I'll just throw in too, I really honor folks that create public art in the book. They help people connect with the stories of the children and the heroes and heroines and the events. And so I always try to recognize them. I mean, and again, I'm getting a little long-winded here, but one of the folks that created absolutely beautiful art related to African American history, he has statues, and more than statues, I mean, unbelievable displays in Austin, Texas, and Columbia, South Carolina. And I tell his story because before he became a sculptor, he was considered for the Mercury program, NASA astronauts, and he was black, and he was not going to get in to be an astronaut by Ed Dwight is his name. You might have, if you ever watched the PBS documentary, Something to the Moon, Racing to the Moon, or something like that. He is mentioned in there. Ed Dwight, it gave me permission to use his photographs of his art, and I have 4 of them in the book. Sorry. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I know it's impossible for you to include everything, and there's probably a dozen other places you would, but Greensboro was mentioned earlier. I wonder if you can visited Greensboro, the lunch counter is available for.
Yes, so Greensboro, to the answer to your visit, yes, we visited. It was the place that we stopped on the way back. So one of the reasons I wanted to cover like states like Virginia and North Carolina and so on is to give people a possibility of learning more as they traveled back home. So we stopped at Greensboro on the way back, and it's covered, I say, less extensively than the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, because that's in what I'm calling a destination city. But in Greensboro, not only do I talk about the International Civil Rights Center and Museum, which is the name of the Woolworth store where the 4 young men from North Carolina A&T sat in, but there's also teacups around Greensboro that honor African American history. There's also a wonderful statue of the 4 young men on the campus of North Carolina A&T, and that's in the book too. Yes, sir.
You mentioned some of the sacredness of the places in the Civil Rights Movement. I'm wondering whether your faith inspired or was impacted by your own travels.
Yes, I mean, thank you for that question. I mean, I consider myself a religious person, but I don't like wear it like on my sleeve, and when you're a Christian, which I am, you believe in things that you never could see. And so this trip makes you believe that if people become aware of this history, things can get better. We can live in a world that we haven't seen, but our grandchildren could be in that world. So that's how I think of it from the point of view of faith, and I hope I did get too schmaltzy there in answering your question. That's a really good question, and I probably could talk for 2 more hours about that, and I'll stop. Thank you very much. You guys are wonderful patients. Jim, speaking of patience, this man, Jim McVeigh, is arguably the best real estate agent in Charlottesville. I hope no one else is a real estate agent here. But I told you we moved here in 2011. I met Jim by sending him an email in 2006 or 7, one of those years. And I sent an email to a real estate agent in about 10 different cities, and somehow I was fortunate enough to pick Jim for Charlottesville. And when we would come down, Jim would be really patient. He knew at the beginning that we were not going to move immediately. And of course, the crash of 2008 even put that off. But at one point, Jim said to me, after probably he showed us 20 houses on our 40th visit down here, "Are you guys ever going to buy a house?" So you've been patient in listening to me tell that story, Jim. What is your question?
First, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned Brian Stevenson. Please comment a little bit more about whether you want to refer to it as overlap with what you're presenting and what his work is.
Oh gosh, my work is paltry compared to his work. I mean, this is a man who's dedicated his life. I mean, you heard about my career. It was in the advertising business. My daughter married a young man whose dad told him never marry anybody in the advertising business, and she was in the advertising business. So, advertising business is just above congressman. What was your question? So, back to Brian Stevenson. I mean, he has dedicated his life to helping people who were wrongly accused or exorbitantly sentenced. And I don't know if anybody had the opportunity to hear him 2 weeks ago now in Charlottesville. He was just unbelievably inspiring. He has, used the platform that he has created to bring attention to issues like mass incarceration, the museums that he has, bring you face to face in a very blunt way with slavery, lynching, mass incarceration, absolutely insane civil rights, absolutely insane Supreme Court and other court rulings. I mean, you really are confronted with the real stuff there. And, you know, I, in a small way, try to help that organization with charitable donations, and, you know, the profits go to them. So, yeah.
Thank you for supporting that.
Yeah. My pleasure. Heather?
There's a lot of effort going into rewriting history services and so forth at the moment, and maybe changing history in other ways. Do you think this will be a positive or a negative for the museums and the sites you've been talking about?
Wow. Thoughtful question. Well, I tend to be a glass half full type person, and try to look at the positives. And so I'm hoping it's a positive that the backlash that can come from people who care about this history can hopefully defeat those that want to keep this history out of schools. You can't hide this. I mean, and you know, I really don't understand the thought process where somebody says that talking about it makes them uncomfortable. I feel that talking about it makes you understand. Talking about it makes you want to act, which is really the second part of Christianity, faith and action, you know. So I think that the run for school board, Heather, you'd be a great candidate for school board. I worked with Heather on the Affordable Care Act for the last probably 10 years. But probably many of you would be great. So we just have to get ourselves in position to speak up and act when people threaten the ability for our children and grandchildren to learn this history. Yeah, that was a really good and tough question. I hope I did justice to it. Karen?
I had the privilege of working with a nurse at UVA. She was an LPN. She graduated from Lane High School in '54. And she knew the time when the black patients in the 50s and 60s, I don't know how far past the 60s it went. And the old hospital, of course, it's 70. The black patients were in the basement. So no real rooms or anything. They were in the basement with the pipes and all that sort of stuff. And with policemen, with German Shepherd dogs for when the white nurses came and took care of them.
In the 70s.
In the 70s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't that long ago. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
thank
can't
you
afford to forget that. Like, I never knew that, but you need to know that.
Right.
You can't afford to not know that information.
Here's,
And people who were born and raised here, when I would mention that or talk to people, no clue that that had happened.
Right.
And
Yeah.
none. And, yeah.
well, I mean, when you read this history, you see situations where injured people, people who were shot during demonstrations would have to be taken to hospitals much further away, putting their ultimate life and recovery in jeopardy just because of Jim Crow segregation. Yeah. So.
Will you be signing books at all?
I will be signing books with anything that anyone wants them to be signed with. My standard signing is something to encourage you to make the journey. You know, thank you for supporting the project. Thank you for the journey. I hope that you will also see that the Historical Society donation jar is back there. So save a few shekels for that. The book is $24.95. Since you're Virginia residents, if you're going to pay with cash, just get close to $25. I'll figure out what to do with the state. If you're writing me a check, though, pay the tax, $26.27. We can also do Venmo, I think, although the last time I did one of these, a couple of people walked out with the book and my Venmo thing never registered. We also have a Square swiper that will take credit cards. So you're very patient. I apologize if I took you past your dinner time, but thank you so much. Thank you, Deborah, for asking that question. Oh, I do. Can I say, if you don't want to buy the book tonight, it's available at through the library. They were kind enough to buy 4 copies. I checked last night. 2 of them have been checked out. I was checking that. So, they never know they might need to replace, right? So rip a few pages out when you buy it, when you take it. It's also available locally at the Blue Whale bookstore on the downtown mall, and at the New Dominion bookshop. New Dominion was down to 3 copies a couple of weeks ago. Blue Whale should have at least a half dozen, maybe a few more. So if you go to one and there's none, go to the other, and if they're not, give me a call and I'll hand deliver it. Thank you. I'll get back there right now. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Sterling.
Thank all of you for coming out. Thanks to Northside Library, and thank you, Evan. If you've enjoyed this program, you know what to do. And please send me any comments on our Facebook or over our website, and we'll see you at the next program. Thank you very much.
Oh, really?
I think I'll have him sign for another time.
Oh, okay.
I said that to move it along so that I could